Lapidary trim saws can be a pretty big expense, so I'm going to show you how to convert a Dremel or other micromotor with a flexible shaft into a DIY trim saw, all under $60, and that's not including the price for the motor. While you could try to cut the stones freehand, it can get a little dicey since you risk more of a chance of having the stone flying everywhere since you are holding the stone instead of pushing it across a rigid table like with a trim saw. So it's just not as safe, even though it still is possible. This does not take too long to make though, and it's just easy to set up and break down, so it's worthwhile kind of making this ahead of time. So the first thing you're going to want to do is pull up the menu for your local Chinese restaurant and order a soup to go. It'll most likely come in a nice container like this, which is the absolute perfect little container for our DIY trim saw. And also keep that lid too, since that's the surface I use to mix the epoxy for my inlay jewelry. So it's a great way to recycle and reuse things you'd usually toss. We want to cut a small groove into the side of this to fit our flex shaft bit. Because I do jewelry full time, I have a jewelry specific micromotor, and it's the Foredom 2230 SR. It has the H30 handpiece, so it can accept a wide range of burrs of different thicknesses, up to I think 1/8 of an inch. If you have a Dremel or something similar, it's very important that you get a flexible shaft attachment since we're going to be working around water and you don't want to electrocute yourself. The flex shaft gives you a lot of distance between the water and the motor and is usually a smaller handpiece, so it's easy to manipulate in your hand as well. And while optional, it's also super helpful to have a flex shaft hanger so it keeps the micromotor out of the way as you're working. So I have my diamond wheel here, and it has a bit attachment that's kind of has a really large head on it. I want to cut a groove into the side of the container so that the bit is under the rim of the top. It needs to be below that since the burr needs to be able to spin freely with the plexiglass lid on top of it. I'll make a little mark to tell me how deep I need to cut and not much further past the diamond burr shank since we need to still be able to fill this up with water as blade coolant. Then just use some scissors to cut it out. It's going to be a little hard since the plastic is kind of semi-rigid. So it's going to be, it's not going to look clean, but honestly, it doesn't have to be pretty because it will still get the job done. Test it out with a bit, and you can see here that I have a little bit more to cut off for the shank to be below that rim line. Once we have that taken care of, we can get out the adjustable vise. So if you already have a vise, great, go ahead and use that. But I really like this adjustable one since you can mount it to just about any table and you can change the angle of the vise, which is super useful for inlays and other stone carving when you put the flex shaft handpiece in here. So go ahead and attach that to your table for now so we can make adjustments to our DIY trim saw. Then put the flex shaft handpiece into the jaws of the vise and tighten it up. The jaws on this adjustable vise are nice because they have a rubber cover on each side that protects your handpiece from getting all marred up. So if you have something with metal jaws, you'll want to wrap the handpiece in a piece of leather or cloth to keep it from potentially getting damaged. For now, I'm just putting a few pieces of scrap wood under the cup to prop it up while I make some adjustments. But I ended up just using a stack of soup container lids later when I went to go use the saw, and that was the best solution for me. It needs to be just high enough so that the shank of the diamond blade is parallel to the floor as it hovers in the container, but low enough so that the head of the shank is under the container rim. Now we're going to work on the lid of our trim saw. I used to do X-Acto blade etchings into thin sheets of plexiglass, so I had this lying around already. This piece is 1 millimeter thick, and it was a little too thin as it had a little bit more give in it as I pressed the stone across the surface to trim pieces out. But it worked well for trimming thinner, maybe like 4 to 6 millimeter mini slabs. I'd recommend getting something more like 2 millimeters thick, so it's a little bit more rigid. The dimensions of mine are 3.5 by 5 inches, but a 4 by 6 inch piece will do just fine. I'm going to hover the plexi over the saw to approximate where I need to saw out a rectangular piece out of the lid so that I can place it over the top of the container. While you could get a bit more exact with measuring the distance of the blade from the edge or whatever, I chose the winging it method and just using my permanent marker to mark where the gap will be, holding that plexiglass so that it is touching either side of the container. Now my diamond blade is 1.5 inches across, and I would not get a blade smaller than that. So instead of making the gap exactly at 1.5 inches, you want to add some wiggle room on either side. So I ended up cutting my blade gap at 2 inches long, giving a 1/4 inch of space on either side of the blade when the lid is on. And the same goes for the width gap. While the blade is 0.55 millimeters thick, I made the gap 5 millimeters wide just to give it some extra room. Then I'll finalize what I'll cut out with a fine Sharpie. And then I'm going to take a small drill bit in my flex shaft. Mine was about 1 to 1.5 millimeter in that range. And I'll drill a hole inside the permanent marker line so that we can saw inside those lines. I'm going to use my jeweler's saw frame to cut this out. I have a size 2 blade tightened in the top set screw and with the saw blades facing downward. And then I'll feed the other end through the drilled hole before tightening it on the bottom set screw. Then I'll tighten up the tension of the blade by holding the back of the saw frame while pulling the bottom jaw down and tightening the last set screw so that the blade is pulled tightly to saw. So then you'll just saw all the way around the rectangle to make that gap for the blade. Now, if you don't have a jeweler's saw and you don't want to pay like the $15 for a frame and a pack of cheap saw blades, I saw that you can use an X-Acto blade to cut through the plexi by holding the blade against a ruler and just keep going over that lines repeatedly until it's cut all the way through. Now, I'd try that on my first go around. I found it to be a bit obnoxious, but that is another option for you. Once in a while, I am using some blade lubricant like beeswax or even dish soap, just so the blade isn't sticking to the plexi, but it's not super necessary. When you get to the corners, you can't just turn the blade or else you'll snap it. So what you want to do is, without moving the saw forward, just make the frame go up and down and you slowly turn the plexi. This makes the blade slowly pivot around that tight corner. Or if anything, just round out the corners to make it easier to saw if you're having trouble. While you could choose a different material for the lid, ideally it should be waterproof and you don't want the material to be super thick, like no more than 4 millimeters thick, because the thicker the material, the less blade height you have to cut through slabs. Go ahead and test fit your lid to see if you have it in the right spot or if you need to make any additional adjustments. Adding water to the container, you can now see why you didn't want to cut that notch down too far, or else you wouldn't be able to get water up to the bottom of the saw blade. I'd get the water maybe a little less than 1/8 of an inch up the blade, so there's just enough water to keep the blade and rocks cool while also not making too much spray. And this is just my reminder that you must always cut stones with water. First, the water keeps the stone cool as you're cutting so that it doesn't damage the stone. It also reduces the heat on the diamond blade, which could damage the tool. And lastly, and most importantly, water reduces the rock dust from flying in the air, which can cause silicosis, which is a very serious and irreversible condition for your lungs. So I often wear a 3M half mask respirator as I work, since you only get one pair of lungs. Now, another thing you might notice here that the inner workings of the flex shaft handle are a bit vulnerable to water corrosion in this setup. But I had the solution, and that is a soda bottle cap. Drill a 3/16 hole right in the center of the cap, and then just use some wide painter's tape to hold it down. And that works just so well to keep the water out. But I'd also add a little protective layer like machine oil in there just as a backup. Your micromotor handpiece might be a little bit different than mine, so you may have to use something slightly different to cover the end like this, but I can guarantee you can probably recycle something to fashion it. As you may imagine, any trim saw will kick up some water. So you could go ahead and fashion a lid somewhat like this out of half of another soup container, or I've seen folks just use a decent size clear plastic bin from the hardware store that they turn on its side to keep the water from spraying backwards and side to side. So you'll still might get some spray in the front, but that's just something you'll have to deal with by maybe wearing a waterproof apron and having many shop towels at the ready. So I want to make this trim saw so that the lid would be easily removable, but would still stand tightly. So the best solution I came up with was cheese wax. So yes, just buy some yummy Baby Bell Gouda, and then you have yourself a tool with the wax wrapper that it comes in. It's soft and pliable, so add a little bit to the edges in like the front and the back, but it has a really good stickiness, so it holds that plexiglass super well while also being water resistant. Best free tool ever. We are all done and ready to set up our trim saw station. I have my adjustable vise clamped to the right edge of my table, and my flex shaft handpiece is already tightened in there. You can see my flex shaft hanger is also clamped to the table, keeping my motor away from the water. Foot pedal is below. I use a big stack of soup lids to raise the container to the correct height, and then these are placed in a larger container lid just to keep water off my shop table. My diamond blade bit is locked into my handpiece with my soda bottle protector taped in place. The handpiece is parallel to the floor and resting in the container. Then once you add water to the container, you can put the lid on and you're just about ready to go. Just one last thing before you get started. Take note which direction your micromotor spins. You want to set up your saw so that it's spinning downwards towards your material like you see here, which means you may have to orient your micromotor on the correct side of your body to get it to be spinning downwards like that. If you don't, you could end up with stones coming at your face, and you really do not want that. So my Foredom has a switch that spins either forward or reverse, so that's not a problem here. And that brings me to safety talk. As always, with anything lapidary, you need to have eye protection on at all times. Have your long hair tied up, have closed-toe shoes. Respirator is optional, but definitely encouraged, as this can potentially make a bit more rock dust mess than usual, and it's just best to keep your lungs safe from silicosis. Because my micromotor has a foot pedal, keeping a consistent speed is a bit tricky, but I'm trying to find a speed that's not too fast or not too slow. And unfortunately, that's super vague, but I have no idea where to begin on RPMs. But basically, once you have the blade going, you can gently slide the mini slab into the blade to cut through. You don't need to press hard, but as the blade abrades the stone, you can keep moving the stone forward, since, as you may well know, diamond blades work by slowly grinding away at the stone instead of actually like cutting it, kind of like scissors or like a wood saw. So if your finger touches the blade, you won't get cut. I mean, unless you're like really pressing hard against it. So there's really nothing to worry about here. You can even split 1/4-inch slabs in half, but you need to cut the piece into like a smaller piece first. Like here, I trimmed the circle first, and then I can cut it in half. I didn't do it here, but to make things easier to split the stone right in half, you can draw a little line around the stone at the halfway point using a thin permanent marker. And you can see my other YouTube on how to split slabs. I'll add it in the description below. Then you line up that center line with the diamond blade and slowly cut through. I did notice that doing this, like splitting little mini slabs, spent a lot of water. So anytime you're getting a lot of stone buildup, you need to stop and add more water, since you never want to run your diamond blades dry on stone. That'll create a lot more rock dust in the air, and it'll ruin your diamond blades. And eventually I just took the lid off because I found it was more hassle than it was worth, and it was just easiest just to do it directly over the container like you can see here. So for sure, this is not the most ideal trim saw, as it certainly has some cons. For one, it will be a bit wet since there is no shield to keep the water spray from flying. You also have to contend with the water pooling on the plexiglass surface. Cutting half a soup container in half to serve as a shield did work well for the spray going up, but I did notice that most of my spray was kind of coming directly at me, and fashioning some kind of buffer in the front could get in the way of the slab when you're pushing it forward. Another big downfall is that you can't really get huge slabs in here. So I'd say this is really great for slabs up to 1/4 inch and maybe about 4x4 inches, just because the lid surface area is pretty small compared to a full trim saw. You can also see the actual flex shaft handle can get in the way, but I was able to kind of carefully angle the slab so it would slide up and over the handle, so I still could cut. There is potential that this could bind up the diamond blade, since you may accidentally shift the stone while you're cutting. So keep a close eye on your stone if you're trying to get it over the handle. And if it seems to be getting bound up, just stop the machine immediately, and you should be able to slide the stone back out and try again to keep that angle straight. Despite its flaws, this certainly will get you going in the least expensive way possible. So I hope you found this helpful in making some lapidary equipment a little bit more accessible to everyone. And if you happen to have any other ideas on how to make it better, feel free to leave a comment below. Thanks, and happy stone cutting, y'all.